So, the first question I was asked by Marjorie was, I had said in the message that to a certain extent, money can at times prolong life. I think I said something like that. And she asked me how does that intersect with the fact that the Bible says every one of our days is numbered. In fact, let me back that claim up, the scripture and the sovereignty of God. Turn to Psalm 139. We see very clearly a statement about the sovereignty of God on the length and the span of our life. So if you look at verse 13 and through 16, Psalm 139. You formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden for you when I was made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. So a finite, precise number of days is accounted before I was ever born. So how then can I meaningfully speak of adding to? I mean, even Jesus, by anxiety, you can't add one day to your life. The short answer would be, when I say with money or with things we do, we can prolong our life, from our vantage point, from this side of we see things we speak of human responsibility, because the Bible teaches real human responsibility. And the Bible teaches that despite the fact that God is absolutely sovereign, that sovereignty never mitigates or removes human responsibility. And so, sure, in one sense, I can say, just as the crucifixion was planned from the foundation of the earth, that the recent events with the drone being shot down and the near conflict with Iran was planned before the foundation of the... Sure, I could absolutely agree to that, while meaningfully speaking of the human agents that acted and caused meaningfully the events that took place. So we could say, just like the apostles, you delivered over the author of life, you put him to death, doing exactly what God had predetermined to take place from the foundation of the world. So humanly speaking, taking medicine and money will... Traditionally, the wealthy can eat cleaner, have better hygiene, eat healthier food that's not rotten, have access to better doctors and medical treatment. And so, in a sense, by partaking of those things, can, generally speaking, extend to some degree their life. Yet, none of that would compromise the fact that every one of their days was written. And Elsa brought the example of even that is their attempts at prolonging life. Steve Jobs, with all of his money and getting to the top of a liver transplant list, nope. So it's not a guarantee, but what I was mainly doing in making that point is offering a concession, because here I'm saying, look, your money can't save you from death, and I could picture someone saying, well, it might for a few months or a few years, to which I would say, okay, sure. Stalin lived a few more years than the people he murdered, but they're all dead now. And 10 million years from now, he's not going to be holding his comfort. Yes, I'm in hell, but at least I lived a little longer than this other guy. It's going to be of zero importance. So that's where I was going when I said that. That's the point. And I'm just conceding the point that we might be tempted to think, it's easy for me to say that, but if I could have afforded the treatment that this other person could have afforded, then I would have lived longer, or my child would have lived longer, or whatever. Certainly living in the first world, we have access to medical treatments and disease prevention that people in other parts of the world do not have. I'm just not denying that. But in any sort of meaningful, significant sense, when you start to look at eternity, it is meaningless. You lived to be 89 and went to hell. Woohoo! That's the point. Versus, you could live to be 17 and get cut down, and if the Lord is your Redeemer, you have life and you have riches. That's the point I'm trying to get at. So, humanly speaking, there are things we can do that humanly are going to shorten or lengthen our life, not in an absolute sense, and not in any relatively significant sense, and not in a way that in any way undermines the fact that every single one of your days was formed before you lived it. That's what I'm what I would say. Any follow-up on that or thoughts on that? Okay, then we'll open up broader. Yes, Steve. You want no microphone, Steve. Our faithful 7 or 8 podcast listeners want to know what you have to say. I discovered that me listening to it doesn't count, Greg.
You seem to easily slip into this duality of God is sovereign, but yet we can change things. And, of course, I fight this with my past. Why did I keep trying to change misery, suffering, and death? In the same sense, why do we pray? Why do we ask God to change his mind?
Sure.
Why do we bring people up that we're concerned about and ask for intervention?
Sure.
So that's the duality that you usually say, yes.
Well, okay, then I will just take the easy out and say yes, Steve. No. The key issue is, again, we want to draw the conclusions the Bible draws from things. And the Bible will use the sovereignty of God not as we might intuit to mitigate, remove, lessen human responsibility, but actually to establish action. So the Apostle Paul, I want to say, is it Paul? Or is it First Peter? Go to 1 Peter, I believe. Chapter 1. Let's see if I'm right here. Nope. Titus? Is it Titus? Hold on. It might be Titus. It's God who cannot lie, promised for the ages began. That's what I'm looking for in the first 3 or 4 verses of Titus. Yeah, right there. Verses 1 and 2. So Paul is going to use his confidence in election as his motivation for his ministry, not as a reason he can, play another game of golf and relax, because after all, I'm just trying to show the Bible doesn't apply it. It takes truths and applies them differently than you and I might be tempted to apply them. That's all I'm trying to show. But it's aware of them. It's not like it's unaware of them. So Paul, a servant of God and an apostle of Jesus Christ, for the sake of the faith of God's elect and their knowledge of the truth, which accords with godliness, and the hopes of eternal life, which God, who never lies, promised before the ages began. So Paul, his entire ministry, understands, is a ministry of bringing the gospel to God's elect. And yet we know how hard Paul works, how much he spends himself. So I think Paul's logic is, and I would say one of the things you can do with the sovereignty of God is, if God says he's going to accomplish something, then I will gladly give myself to a job and a mission which ultimately cannot fail. There is no promise that my earthly endeavors will succeed, but Christ will build his church, and against this the gates of hell will not prevail. So I'll spend my life in the church because here's a project that cannot fail in a way that mission boards or countries or whatever businesses can. The church, this church might fail. Hope it won't, but we know from Revelation that the Lord threatens to take away individual lampstands. But the church writ large cannot fail. So you could argue that the sovereignty of God gives confidence for work. But the other place, if you go to Philippians, and I'll just do a brief treatment because this isn't a major part of Psalm 49. I'll give a brief treatment, although the very first message in that series I gave you tries to deal with this to some degree. There's the philosophical category we're dealing with is the issue of what's called compatibilism or non-compatibilism, which is simply the term, the jargon that the guild, the philosophical guild, has called this issue. And what it deals with, compatible or not compatible, is divine sovereignty compatible? Can it coexist with human volition, choice, and effect. And a compatibilist says yes, and a non-compatibilist says no. So to put that another way, the non-compatibilist, which is, I think, what most of us would intuit if we don't think it through carefully, would say divine sovereignty and human responsibility are incompatible notions. Once you've established one, you've nullified the other. So a non-compatibilist, these are not biblical categories, these are philosophical categories, but they're concepts the Bible certainly deals with. They're just a name given to them by men, is if you don't believe they're compatible notions, then you will assume the duality that says either or. Either God did it or he did it. Either my actions had consequence and effect, or God predestined it. And I am a compatibilist, meaning I think, and let me speak clearly, I'm not claiming I can explain how divine sovereignty and human responsibility coexist. I'm simply saying I believe they do. I can no more explain how they coexist than I can explain how my car engine works, even though I believe it does work. Right? So I can say, I believe my car will get me home today, even though I have no sufficient means of explaining to exactly how it has to do with pushing a pedal and turning a wheel. And but beyond that, I'm kind of at a loss. So I can believe a thing works and is, even if I can't explain to you how the thing itself breaks down into parts. So I can say I believe the Bible lays out divine sovereignty as not nullifying, as not undermining human responsibility, even while I say I'm not entirely sure how that works. I see no essential contradiction there, and I will freely grant what I would intuit or what I would just jump to would be, well, of course, one nullifies the other. But then you go to, say, Philippians chapter 2. And I see, and I can show you a number of examples. So I will freely grant there's a mystery. Like the part where I don't get it, I'm with you. I don't get it. I just believe the boss said this is the way it is. I'm like, okay, that's the way it is. You know what I mean? That's apparently the universe we live in. So Paul will say this in verse 12 and 13 of chapter 2. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And the Greek word for work is energo. We get our English word energy from it. It's an active term. There's nothing passive about it. Get to work, Paul says. What am I getting to work doing? Working out my salvation. We'd call that, I think, sanctification. Get to work becoming a Christian, acting like a Christian. Get to work doing those things God would have you do. Why should I? That he gives me a reason why. This is meant to be the motive for why. For it's God who works in you both to will and to work according to his good pleasure. And I would assume, if you're telling me, Paul, God will cause me both to want to obey him and to actually obey him, then what do I need to get busy working out for? Why on earth? Why not just sort of do what the Keziks, let go and let God? So apparently the Apostle Paul is a compatibilist. All I mean by that saying is Apostle Paul does not see verse 13 nullifying the command of verse 12. And so as a compatibilist, the theological category, these are just names people come up with. You name a mystery and you think you understand it. C.S. Lewis famously once made this point, talking about how we can fall into the trap of thinking just because we name something, we understand it or rule over it. He famously said, to say that birds fly south by instinct is simply to say we don't know why they fly south. No, and there's a great truth to that. Naming things, as we see Adam naming the animals or even the woman, is a way of exercising dominion. And so just because you call it concurrence or compatibilism, you've named a mystery, you've not explained it. From theological, concurrence would be speaking of God working sovereignly and effectively and efficiently, and the man, the creature, working in a way that actually is causal, together in concert with one another. The philosophical view of compatibilism is simply these two concepts are not exclusive. They're not either or, they are compatible. So Paul is able to give this command that I get busy working at the very thing he tells me God is causing me to will and to do. In fact, the reason I'm to get together and work is because. So rather than actually undermining my responsibility, he puts it forward as the ground or warrant or motive for my responsibility, which I will freely admit is not intuitive to me. Freely admit that is not immediately the conclusion I'd come to. Hey, Jeremy, God is going to cause you to desire and to do the things that please him. My initial knee-jerk reaction would not be, freely grant, well, then I better get to work busting my butt obeying him. That's what Paul says. Or go to Genesis 50:20. This Joseph, I'll touch on this briefly with the last one I look at. Joseph's statement to his brothers about, now we're dealing with sin. We're dealing with their wickedness, with their, they kidnapped him, they faked his death, and they sold him into slavery. And after Jacob dies, they're afraid Joseph's going to get his revenge, and they come to him pleading and begging. And remember, you promised, Dad, you wouldn't do anything. And Joseph says in verse 19, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. And again, I've got these two parallel meanings. His brothers meant stuff, and God meant stuff in one and the same action, which would bring me back to your question, Steve. God's sovereignty works through means. So even something as innocuous as God causing a gourd plant to die with Jonah, he did how? How did he just snapped his fingers, the plant died? He caused a worm to come up and eat it, right? So God works through means. God carries out his will through means, through agency. And so we could meaningfully say that worm killed that plant, and we can meaningfully say God killed that plant. He did it by sending the worm. So I would say, Steve, that God saved life, preserved life, and minimized suffering through your agency. And you did those same things as well. And that's exactly how God accomplished it. Give an example. Praying for someone. You bring up the question of praying for someone. So we're praying for Ron's friend in hospice to finish well, right? And I could picture saying, well, look, whether or not they're going to finish well has been determined before the foundation of the earth. God's going to give the grace for them to finish well, or he's not. You're not going to change God's mind. That would be one way of looking at it. I don't think that's a right way to look at it. Let me flip it this way. Is the desire that Ron's friend finish faithful a good desire? Would the Bible indicate that's a good desire? Like that desire reflects God's heart or pleases God? Is that a good thing? I would say it is. Where did that good thing on Ron's heart come from? His own righteousness wells up within him, like just Ron's righteous heart produced this righteous desire. I would think it's evidence of the grace of God that this good desire is on Ron's heart because God put this good desire in Ron's heart. So now I think I'm building a framework where you mean the God who sovereignly determines whether Ron's friend will finish faithfully put on Ron's heart the desire to pray that he might finish faithfully. Might this not be the very means by which God intends to cause Ron's friend to be faithful to the end? I'd, if anything, be encouraged by it. When I find someone on my heart, when I find someone on my mind, when I'm burdened for them, I'm actually more encouraged that God's going to do the thing I'm asking, because why else is this so heavy on my heart? I'm not normally walking around burdened. There are some people, some things that I'm just not normally burdened for, that if all of a sudden for a few days I'm just thinking, praying about this a lot. If anything, I'm becoming more and more hopeful. Like, what are you doing, God? What's going on? You're up to something. I mean, he's always up to something, and it's always good, but maybe you're up to this very good thing that I'm doing. So the other flip side is if God's not sovereign, then we can't meaningfully ask for the very prayer request Ron asked. Because if the flip side is that man's will eliminates the sovereignty of God, then the faithfulness of Ron's friend is entirely up to him. And God can't intervene, or his friend would be a robot. So, in one sense, we can only pray Ron's request if we believe in a sovereign God. If God's not sovereign, if God's not sovereign, we could pray for things like rain or sunshine or things like that. But we can't pray for anything that involves human agency because, after all, human choice eliminates divine choice. And so wherever human choice is involved, God has to definitionally be hands-off. So I freely admit, Steve, there are mysteries here, but going the other side and saying God's not in control doesn't get you out of the hot water pot, and it creates to some degrees more problems than it solves. But mostly, I just want to go where the Bible goes. And so the early church was able in one breath to blame Pilate, the Romans, and the Jews for killing the Messiah, even as they credit the act to God's wise plan and counsel. And again, I look at it like, apparently they don't see it being either or either. I guess it's not either or. Again, I'm not claiming to understand how that works. I just think it does, just like I think my car, I'm pretty confident, will get me home today. I'd recommend, if you want to go further, I had Mandy make a couple packets of some series we've done. I made a couple packets of our parenting series and a couple packets of the election and predestination series. And I don't know if you've listened to it recently, but the very first message is my attempt to take what I just said in 10 minutes and spend an hour unpacking it. I got some books I can point. We can meet and talk. That's about as far as I can go right now. Is that good to do for now, Steve?
Yeah, I think I understand it.
Okay.
I would call it schizophrenic.
Schizophrenic. Okay. That's cool.
And it can wait till poker night.
Okay. Very good, sir. Next question. Oh, Lee.
Well, I don't think that's complicated what you're just talking about, because if God has plans, he's not just going to go around sending angels to do it all. He's got to have, unless he wants to, we can, but he's going to use humans to fulfill his plans. So, I don't know. It doesn't seem like rocket science to me. But the other question is the blank.
Human responsibility, divine sovereignty, not rocket. But this blank is vexing me. Okay. Great.
It's 3B, the path of upright something.
Confidence.
Okay. The path of, okay. Thank you.
Okay. A and B are both confidence. I think I'm going to zig and a zag. Okay. Any questions about Ozymandias? He's dead, that's right. Oh, no, Linda had a question. Hold on, Linda's got one. No, as I was reading this psalm, my son had to memorize this for part of his school. And I'm somewhat familiar with it. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, man, I think that's what Ozymandias... And so I looked it up, and it's really short. It's just a paragraph long. Like, that's exactly it. And then I thought it'd be cool, but, in one sense, nobody knowing it even proves the point further. Or how few people are familiar with it proves the point even further. But yes, Linda.
Okay, this might tie in a little bit, because I think it was around that time you said today that there were kind of... I'm paraphrasing, but no degrees of punishment in hell.
No, I did not say no degrees of punishment.
Okay.
No degrees of glory. They're not big dog. There are people, hell will be worse for some people than others.
Okay.
Nobody will have clout, power, reputation, underlings in their thrall. That's done. So the picture of Stalin in hell in a mansion with other people, no, that's what I mean. All of that glory. That's the word that the text used. Their glory will not go with them. Yes, hell will be worse for some people than others. There will be no glory and clout in that sense. That does not go with them.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, because I remembered that previously you had said there would be, and so I was just wanting to...
The best picture we can get is there's no society in hell. It's outer darkness. It's gnashing of teeth. I don't think people are in communion and fellowship and interacting. I picture it more like absolute separation and darkness from God and from each other. There are one or two passages that poetically speak of some community, but it's usually mocking a third party. This is the one when this person goes down hell, those in hell will rise up and they will say, "Is this the one who shook the earth?" Which speaks of them, and it's a word picture of showing, again, the same sort of picture. This person thought they were so mighty, but they too died. That's the only thing I can think of that even suggests any interaction of the people in hell. And there, I think it's easy enough to explain. It's just a word picture. But that's about it that I can think of to suggest that even the people in hell are aware of each other at all. So you hear people like, I'd rather party in hell. Like, yeah, I could be partying. It's not going to be what's taking place there. Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts, questions? Oh, Jamie.
You just blew my mind. How is hell going to be worse for some rather than others?
How?
Yeah. I mean,
where
are you drawing that from?
I don't know how. I got some guesses.
Okay.
That it is, our Lord says, it'll be more bearable in the day of judgment for Sodom than for you, Capernaum. For if the works done in Capernaum had been done in Sodom, they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes and been established to this day. Now there's Jesus saying, people in Sodom are going to be faring better at the judgment than you, right? And we know there's degrees of reward in glory. Now, how? I'm now leaving the text, and I'm going to guess. I'll borrow Jonathan Edwards' guess. All God has to do is increase a person's capacity for suffering. Right? This is Edwards' guess. It's a guess. It's how it could be done. I'm not saying it's how it is done, but just to show it's conceptually a coherent idea, I can give you one conception of how it might be. I'm not saying this is how it is, but if we can come up with at least one coherent conception, it makes it a little easier to believe it will be. Edwards likens vessels, buckets, and barrels submerged in an ocean. And in that ocean, he's thinking of it positively, joy. How can there be degrees of blessing and joy in heaven without envy, without some people feeling bad? And he says, in the infinite ocean of God's goodness and love, all vessels are full, if they're submerged, but some vessels are more full than others. A bathtub's got more water in it than a bucket, right? They're all full. No one could be any happier, but some's capacity is bigger. Another thing I construct positively is that in Edwards takes this and Piper runs it further. One of the and you got to be careful with guesswork and logic because it only goes so far. And so I want to throw this out and freely admit maybe, not this is the way it is. But if every day, if God's glory is infinite and every day we are learning new glories of God, there's one way that every day can be better than the last. I know him more and more and more fully. I'm learning more, and I'm never getting bored. I'm never running out of things. Well, what if some people's pace is quicker than others? What if the concept is you're pouring an infinite amount of the knowledge of God into this container, but some people are pouring it faster than others. Some's getting more in there than others. We're all going to the same place. All of us are growing in our knowledge of him. All of us are no longer seeing through a glass darkly. We're knowing face to face. But what if you flip that upside down, invert that now with hell? There's conceptual ways that could happen. I don't know how it happens, but with Jesus' statements and some other statements, it is clear, I think, biblically, there are degrees of punishment. How God does that, I don't know. But at least one coherent suggestion has been made by Jonathan Edwards, which I'll throw out there as maybe, who knows. Okay? Okay. Next question. Oh, Renee Lucia, who saved my daughter's life. Well, God used her to save my daughter's life. My daughter stopped breathing at Camp Appanus, and Renee gave her a rescue breath. She had a febrile seizure, and Renee was on hand. Cometh the hour, cometh the woman.
To God be the glory, really. Since hell was brought up, I have a question about what seems to be happening in our society.
Okay, we've connected some dots I did not see getting connected. Let's go. Let's do this.
The preoccupation with zombie movies.
Actually, I will offer my purest thought. I read an article talking about that. Here's my simple, short answer. We are not going off in a big tangent on this. Especially in a more postmodern culture where people are told ethics are relative and stuff. I think it's a way of manifesting our understanding that we deserve judgment. I mean, all these movies have, whether the pandemics or whatever, the whole narrative that all these movies portray is we're moments away from this tidal wave of judgment and death hitting us. And I think that resonates and rings true in people's hearts. So we envision it being aliens or disease or zombies or a meteor or climate change or whatever, but we're constantly coming back to this notion of this apocalyptic event, right? That's the language people use. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Someone's reading this article. He's also suggesting that's why some horror movies and even Stephen King books and stuff are popular, because in them, at least, evil is evil. There's clearly seen lines of what's evil. It's the point of a horror movie is not to understand Jason Voorhees' psychology and understand from his perspective his mass murders kind of no, he's the bad guy, right? He's the epitome of bad, and then these people, try to survive him, and people are hungry for some stories where the bad guy's bad, and I don't need to worry about the various shades of gray in between, and I think there's probably something to that too, but it's speculation. But those speculations, when I read them, there might be something to that. I don't know if we can say much more than that, but you're right.
Well, so how would you reason with like a teenager who seems very preoccupied with zombie movies to encourage them in Christianity and pursuing God and a godly life?
That's an interesting question. Depends how reasonable they are. It depends how self-aware they are. Most of us don't even know why we like the things we like. I mean, who can, I mean, some people can. Other people, I don't know why I just like this. And so if I deal with a teenager who's like, I don't know, I just like them, then I'd probably have a difficult time saying, don't you think it's a manifestation of your awareness of coming judgment and your preoccupation with it? They'd probably be like, no, I just like it, dude, because they're cool. So I don't know if that'd be a useful... If they were self-aware enough to have some estimation as to why they liked it, I might try to have that discussion with them. But otherwise, I'd just present the gospel to them. I mean, it's not like we don't have like the gospel for zombie lovers and the gospel for Muslims and the gospel for... That's one of the things I really like about Tabiti's book on the gospel for Muslims. The whole first chapter is there is no gospel for Muslims. There's the gospel. And then he talks about there are, Islam has got grasp on some things that are less twisted than others. So a Muslim's going to get righteousness and judgment. They're probably going to get that. Now, they will be slightly warped, but those are not going to be foreign concepts to a Muslim like they would be to a postmodern. But judgment, values are relative, So he's mainly highlighting in that book what truths are going to be most in line with our system and what are going to be the hardest sell. But there's just the gospel. So
yes.
I don't have any particular advice for evangelizing people who like zombie movies.
Thank you.
Where I usually try to press anybody I'm talking to in evangelism is to get them to, do they see judgment? I think I told you about the Wodenist I spoke with. He was a worshiper of Odin. Kid you not, you meet strange people in L.A. And so he was homeless, alcoholic guy, and he was young in a backpack. He was tan, and I invited him to my home, and we were talking, and gave him a meal, and just was trying to talk to him, and he was, I'm a Wodenist. Except I read a couple books of Norse mythology when I was a kid. So I'm like, really? And so I'm pressing him in his system. That's fascinating. I have never met a Wodenist. We got a day of the week named after Odin. You guys know that Wednesday is Odwin's Day. That's the origin of that name, Odin. And Thor's Day and Frigga's Day, and then it goes Roman with Saturn's Day. But anyway, Wednesday is Odin's Day. And no, absolutely, that's the origin of Wednesday. And so I'm talking to him, and I'm pressing him for judgment, because I know that in Norse mythology, there's an event called Ragnarok that's coming, and there is a judgment, and that Loki, the god of mischief, is being tormented under a dripping snake of venom tied to a rock by the entrails of his son as he awaits the coming day of judgment. And I'm pressing this guy to see if he knows that, because I'm looking for his system. Tell me how your system deals with sin. Tell me how your system deals with sin. I know it doesn't, so tell me. And and he was just a little surprised that I knew this stuff, and I'm like, so what is Odin going to do to you in your system? What's Odin going to do to you if you do bad stuff? Oh, nothing. What are you talking about? He ties Loki to a rock with the entrails of his kid. You think he's going to let you go? Come on. And this guy was just like, he got out of my house, but and I'm like, no, because I want to, because that's It's even with this psalm. I'll get back to this. We'll tie it back to Psalm 49. Who's going to ransom your soul? Do you know you need a ransom? That's where I'm pressing him. Does he deal with that? And he didn't. I think he just basically uses. I think he liked to view himself as a Viking. As he left my house, he broke into my car and some other people's cars in our parking lot and stole stuff. And I think I'm not mocking him now. I think he sort of pictures himself like a Viking pillaging. And that's how he's going about his life. I think that's like how he tells himself, I'm not a thief and a vagrant, I'm a Viking. You know, we all tell ourselves interesting stories so we can go to sleep at night. But that's where I want to press anybody to, is given what they say and given what they know, how do they deal with this? Because I don't want to just tell them. I want them to see I got no way of dealing with sin and judgment. And then I can be like, I got a way, you know. But can I get them to see they have no way of dealing with sin and judgment? Their attempts to deal with sin and judgment are obsolete. That's me. That's generally when I try to press someone to asking them questions. Tell me, you know. Because, you know, there is no judgment. Okay, then basically Stalin gets away with it, right? I mean, the smart person does what Stalin does. You just don't get caught, but you kill and you abuse and you mistreat people, and as long as you get away with it, you win, right? No. Well, why not? If there is no judgment, why not? You got no reason why not. So what's your complaint against Stalin? What's your complaint against Pol Pot? What's your complaint against Kim Jong-un? What, are you saying anything more than I don't like it when you're saying what he's doing is wrong? Is all you're saying, or the America is saying, is I don't like it and a bunch of us don't like it? Is that all we're saying? Well, that just gets down to Mike Mate's right, because, okay, stop me, and we'll try to stop him, but we're not speaking in any ethical category if there is no judgment, right? I mean, that's the types of things I'll at least try to talk to someone about, get them to see, like, your system doesn't deal with this. You can't deal with reality, and you need to. But anyway, that's the zombie answer questions, tied back to Psalm 49. Okay, 10 minutes. Any other questions? Zombie related or otherwise. Oh, Al Ostrander.
Just couldn't let the zombie stuff go.
Okay.
So I am not a watcher of any of those. I think they're ridiculous. But the other thing I think it does is
okay.
It does two things at once. It minimizes death. It trivializes life. And you watch enough of those, and it's like, well, there's just another dead person. There's, so what? I mean, death. There is no, kind of like you were just saying, there is no consequence to anything. It's just death. It's almost like a fun game. I mean, it's almost like, okay, no big deal. But obviously, very much trivializes life as well. So to me, it's a really, it's a strange phenomenon that just, I think, brings society to an uncaring place, in my opinion. But anyway, just an observation.
No, I do think that is the other piece, because one of the things zombie movies prove so well, if you've seen any, is getting back to Psalm 49. Any person can succumb, and so you can have a character early in the movie who's powerful, who's rich, who later is just a mindless zombie running around next to the other mindless zombies. And so I think that there's a sense in which, so postmodernism gets the sort of existential dread, this sense of there's this hostile universe that doesn't care about me, and at any moment we should die, because after all, we're an accident and we really shouldn't be here in the first place. And I think some of that stuff comes out there too, the chaos, the flipping upside downs. Somebody who's rich and powerful is just a mindless thing next to them. I mean, they like showing those sort of shocking moments in those shows where, you see in the midst of a horde of 1,000, some character from previously, like, oh, they got, now they're just this faceless thing in the swarm. I may have seen one or two zombie movies.
You've probably seen more than I have.
I've heard that's what takes place in some of them. But no, it's interesting to me that we don't have to be hard persuaded that epochal, cataclysmic, apocalyptic events are just around the corner for us. We don't rise during modernism, where we were amazed with ourselves, and secular humanism is big, and we're creating. I mean, think of, in a period of like 100 years, the technological achievements. I mean, for 1,000, 2,000 years of history, people are driving horses and wagons, and we get electricity, and we get radios, and we get TV, and we get cars. I mean, there was a period of time where all this, we were drunk on ourselves. We were drunk on how great man is. I mean, that's Beethoven's Ninth, right? You know, Freud. That's man is awesome. Man is God. Man is wonderful. Look at man. And I think that generation of people would be not nearly so easy to believe a zombie apocalypse or a pandemic or something like that is just around the corner. I think those people, that generation, would think, no, we'd find a way to cure it, we'd deal with it, we would conquer and overcome, just like we eradicated these diseases, just like we've harnessed the atom, just like we, I think that's what would come out of modernism. And I think one of the effects of World War II, the concentration camps, the trench warfare, chemical weapons, is we're just as likely to produce that. I mean, in one sense, you ever watch Star Trek or Star Trek The Next Generation? In big brushstrokes, that's modernism. The belief that give us enough time and enough information, turn the crank long enough, and eventually we will reach a utopian society. We live in peace, we wear spandex, and there's no money. No, but modernism, that's modernism full seed right there. That is the modernist utopia of Star Trek. We'll get past it all, right?
The real question is, do you know the prime directive? Sorry, Al. I do not know the prime directive. But that's the hope. So I don't think all these zombie movies and stuff would be nearly so popular in a modernist society. I think it's why you're never going to see a Statue of Liberty again or a Mount Rushmore again. It takes people who are full of their own hubris to make these giant things. I mean, can you imagine if someone suggested a new Mount Rushmore? Such types of things would not fly in today's ethos. Modernism produced the Eiffel Tower. Modernism produced the Statue of Liberty. Modernism produced all that stuff. You're not going to see that stuff in this climate again. Carrie, bring us home. 4 minutes. Oh, is it Carrie? Yes. Okay.
Okay, so kind of from the sermon to summarize it.
Back to the text?
Yeah.
Novel idea.
Close it out, hopefully with some application too at the end.
Okay.
So kind of the idea that you drew us to at the end is that we know that like money or power, those things aren't going to do anything for us eternally perspective. Right. So all we have is Christ. So how do we focus on that when also knowing that like living in America, and even among living in America, a lot of us are greatly blessed. So like, how do we hold both of those things at the same time of like, all I have is Christ, and really knowing and understanding what that means all the way through, but also recognizing I have these gifts or talents or blessings or money or power or whatever. How do we steward those things at the same time?
All right. I have 2 minutes to go. I'll see what I can do. Okay, great. That's a great question. What I said earlier, and I tried to qualify it, what your possessions will not directly affect your eternity, and I said not directly, indirectly they will, because of course how you use them, what you spend them on, what you do with them will affect your eternity. So the issue is not to go live in a monastery. We sing all we have is Christ, but most of us have cars and clothing and cell phones and shoes, right, and homes. What do we mean all we have is Christ? That's the only thing we have that can't be taken from us. That's the only thing we have that's of value. If we then order everything else around that supreme value, I think we can understand them rightly. It was Augustine who said, he loves anything too little who loves it not for your sake. I'm bungling it. But he's basically saying is, what I enjoy about coffee, I need to enjoy as the good gift from the living God that exists for his purposes. What I enjoy about my family these are his children that he's given to my stewardship for his purpose. If I can view them in that line, I can then enjoy them rightly and use them rightly, and there's all sorts of good stuff to be had there. If I view them as ultimate ends, they will not satisfy, I can't take them with me, and they're meaningless in that sense. If I make a god out of them, then they are useless. And worse than that, there are people who make gods of these things, and all false gods tend to be harsh taskmasters. And so the short 2-minute, because we're out of time, answer is you've got to put them in relationship to what is ultimate. So in light of what is ultimate, we all have some amount of money, I'm guessing, even if it's just 2 nickels. Are you going to spend it and pursue it like it's all that matters, or are you going to spend it and pursue it? Because I think you're going to live differently and make different financial choices if you're viewing eternity and a God who's redeemed you and will receive you, than if you think this is all there is under the sun. I think you're going to pursue money, spend money in power and clout differently that way. That's the 2-minute answer. But yes. Micah 6:6. Elsa needs a microphone so she can read it. We can be done. No. Elsa, you're going to read it for us and we're going to be done. We will be done. Right here we go. Micah 6:6. It's better be good, Elsa.
With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God.
Amen. You are dismissed.